Michael Pena of The Ringer just wrote an article praising the Orlando Magic, predicting them to be the most improved team next season, and nobody is talking about it. He compared them to OKC and Memphis of the previous seasons, and we're going to essentially go through what I agree with and what I disagree with, and whether or not there's some validity to the Orlando Magic potentially being the most improved team next year. But first, before we get into that, guys, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Here at Magic Digest, the best way to support us is to subscribe. And 96.5% of you who are watching these videos aren't subscribed. So guys, make sure to subscribe and support the channel. It's the easiest and best way to do so. Now, getting into the actual article and what was in it, written on The Ringer. The Orlando Magic quietly won the NBA offseason, and he goes into immediately comparing them to the Oklahoma City Thunder and what they did over this past year, and also mentioning the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, he says this year the Orlando Magic are a perfect candidate to fill those shoes, coming off an admirable 47-win regular season competitive playoff appearance and home run offseason that demonstrated an impressive awareness of their own potential and limitations. This team already has winning habits, a hard-nosed style that's harmonious with its personnel, and blooming building blocks who make sense together. And yet, they remain at eight, in their conference currently for championship odds. So that is a number that I was even shocked by. I would say right now that is probably too low, just straight off the bat. But essentially, the article goes into how the Orlando Magic have done a lot and in this offseason, and they've kind of stayed the course and trusted their front office. And I think it's a really well-written piece, and I would challenge everybody to go on and read it. And it predicts the Orlando Magic to be the most improved. And I have some agreements and I have some disagreements, but I think overall the gist of the article is very important and it is well written. So going into what I agree with, well, I think the first and probably the biggest thing that I agree with is the KCP signing. How important that was for the Orlando Magic in this offseason. I think with the backdrop of losing out on Paul George, losing out on Klay Thompson, whether or not you determine those as losses is kind of up to you now, but losing out on those guys and getting still a guy who is a 3-and-D shooting guard who has won 2 championships with 2 separate teams over the last 5 years is super important. And it's something that the Orlando Magic needs, and it's something that he goes into depths with in this article. And he says KCP is a soft breeze when the boat starts to wobble. He does the dirty work, he hits big shots, and then he also mentions that there are 82 players since 2020 who have attempted at least 1,500 three-pointers, and among them Caldwell Pope is one of 7 to make 40%. I was actually probably even more shocked by this one than I was the championship odds placing us at 8th within the conference, but for the most part, I think that this just shows how good KCP is and how good of a signing it is, and just kind of brings more emphasis to just how good of a signing this was. And I think for the most part, it's not that it's going like under the radar, because I think this is like a lot of the national media's, and I'll get into that in later. They're kind of like big reason why the Magic have like won the offseason, but I think it's just kind of a little bit of an underrated move, I'd say, by some of the people covering the team or some of the fans locally here in Orlando, just about how good KCP can actually be for this team. I think 3 years, $66 million is certainly a bargain and not exactly something to scoff at. But getting into another thing that I agree with, he also mentioned in the article that Franz Wagner, his money was necessary. I think at the end of the day, when you're looking at a guy who's getting paid over $200 million, who shot under 30% from 3 last year, and probably like needed to space the floor better with Paolo. I believe their offensive rating when both of them were on the floor wasn't good enough. I think it was like somewhere around like 109.5. You're gonna have some worries, right? Like, how much are they gonna pay this dude? And we just saw Cade get that rookie max extension. Saw Scotty Barnes get that same deal. Now is Franz in that class? I certainly think so, and I think that the money was necessary. And so kind of goes into, look, you have a cornerstone and you locked it down. I think that that's really important. So I agree with that. And then the general feeling from the article that we got was just that Paolo Banchero is all NBA. This is all NBA caliber right now, and next season you are expecting him to make one of those teams and then get that super max extension. And this is the guy that you're going to build your franchise around, and it's absolute. And I agree with that, and I think that he can be the best player on a championship team. And when you're predicting the Orlando Magic to then go from 47 wins to potentially 55 or in the mid 50s range, you're going to need that all NBA type player. Now, the article also goes into kind of just the overall feeling about how his efficiency is. He's going to have to up the efficiency numbers. But we saw from his rookie year to his second year that he upped those efficiency numbers. So I think for the most part, you can pretty much go to the bank that he's going to continue to improve. I don't think we've seen at all anywhere near necessarily the best of Paolo Banchero on the court in the NBA. So I think for the most part, that's a pretty safe bet as well. So I think the article is making a ton of really safe bets and things that I could definitely agree with. Now, another thing that I agree with is that offense is an issue. It mentions it in the article as well, that the offense is where we're lacking. We need more spacing. I mentioned the offensive rating when both Paulo and Franz are on the court. When they're not on the court, it's pretty terrible too. And we saw that in the playoffs. There, when Paolo Banchero kind of went cold or wasn't able to simply just be on the court scoring the basketball, we struggled. We were in the 80s, and obviously the defense kept us in the game, but we needed some pieces. And I think the KCP deal is part of it. We probably still need a point guard, a true point guard, floor general. They're going to trust Jalen Suggs, but for the most part, a guy like Tyus Jones, who was a name that was mentioned, that could be something that is pretty intriguing. But they kind of needed a point guard, and Tyus Jones is a little bit out of the price range as it currently stands. But you never know, and so I think that is just a really aware part of this whole thing. You got to be There's self-awareness. You got to know what you're not good at, and I think it's the offense right now that's holding this team back, and everybody knows that for right now. Another thing that the article mentions is that I agree with is that the Isaac deal wasn't that big of a mistake, or it wasn't as shocking as it was initially when you really kind of took a deep dive. It's back-ended. It's got injury clauses, and you're getting a guy who's all defensive, all world defensively. Essentially for kind of a bargain and kind of on that current contract that he is right now. Shocked a lot of people at first, but not a bad deal. So when you couple all those things together, the KCP signing, Wagner's money being necessary, re-signing most of the rotational players to decent contracts, including Jonathan Isaac, who's all-world defensively, knowing that offense is an issue, so trying to have a point of emphasis for that, and with Banchero hopefully going to All-NBA, I could see why he predicted the Orlando Magic to be that number one team. And that is actually why I do overall agree with his piece. And I do think that this team has the chance to be the next Memphis, the next OKC, really take that next step. Now, here are some of the things that I do slightly disagree with. Now, some of them come with a caveat, but why I disagree with it, we'll go over that. He declared them as the biggest winners of the offseason. I do think that they are a very big winner. I mean, the KCP deal is great, but the biggest winners, I don't know if like that one signing and then the re-signing and the extensions can be like the top winner. I think that might be overzealous. And it's just especially interesting, as I mentioned earlier, that the national media is declaring the Orlando Magic as the biggest absolute winners of the offseason, or one of the top dogs, whenever a lot of local fans feel like the team could have done more. Now, I did make a video earlier about how that could be juxtaposed to the initial expectations of Clay and Paul George. So you didn't get that big star, but you still had a really good offseason, so you're kind of just looking at it through a different lens. But I just find that really interesting that the national media is really, really pushing the Orlando Magic success in the offseason. I do think that this offseason was a success, but to say it was the number one, the biggest winners, I don't know. It remains to be seen. We'll see. We stood pat, got KCP. I think it was good, but we'll see. Then another thing was the Weltman quote about building around a star. I initially actually didn't agree with it. I initially was a little skeptical. I didn't know exactly like how I felt about losing out on Paul George and Klay Thompson when it first happened. But the quote kind of it reined me in a little bit that he mentions in the article. It says from Weltman that part of the step moving forward is showing our young guys how they can take a step forward. We're not going to deviate from our North Star, which is developing our young talent. You're buying into the draft. Orlando's a small market team, well, mid-market I should say, and they're not exactly bringing in free agents every single year. They have to get better before they build through free agency or continue to build. It wasn't going to be the case for the Orlando Magic this year, and they weren't exactly going to be, cutting onions and crying that they lost Paul George. So I actually was I initially disagreed with it because I thought that the point of emphasis that the Orlando Magic had built through the draft, and they should stay on that process and not spend any money. I thought initially it was not exactly the best move because I thought, why not spend the money now before you have to allocate it to two guys before the true CBA steps in and you're in the first, second apron, repeat taxpayer, stuff like that. I thought, why not spend the money now? I'm kind of on board with it. I like the vision, and sometimes you don't want to just destroy the team chemistry. A couple other things was the article mentions Wendell Carter Jr. as a cog in the middle. I do agree. I do agree that Wendell Carter Jr. is a great player, but I think that over time, over the last couple of years, we've seen Paolo Banchero become who he is today. Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony, the rotation in the middle. I think he could potentially be gone. So I think using him as a piece to say that this team could be really good next year is valid. But I don't know if he's gonna be on the Orlando Magic at the start of this year. I really don't. He could be a New Orleans Pelican for all I know. He could be gone, and definitely by the trade deadline. He's got 2 years left on the contract. I don't know where he fits long term, especially with everybody re-signing. And then last but certainly not least, there is a declaration that the Orlando Magic are the biggest threats to the Boston Celtics. I would love to hear what everybody has to say about that in the comments because I am certainly not among them. Among the believers that they are going to be the best or the biggest threat to the Boston Celtics. I think right now there are a lot of teams that improved, including the New York Knicks, but just very interested to hear what all of you guys say. Overall, I think gotta think that the Orlando Magic are going to be one of the top or one of the most improved teams, especially in the Eastern Conference. So why not get a shot at the Orlando Magic? But that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.